Royal photographer Arthur Edwards says Harry and Meghan's wedding was a nightmare.
Well, I can tell you now, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did.
He claims Harry avoided the cameras, Meghan pushed royals aside for celebrities, and guests were left hot, hungry, and unimpressed. Instead of joy, Edwards saw tension, control, and a couple focused on image over love. He even calls it the worst royal wedding he's ever covered the day he realized this wasn't about family or duty, but Meghan's story, with Harry as her supporting role.
Welcome back to Clout Therapy, the place where we peel back the glitter and show you the drama hiding underneath. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest royal bombshells in years. Photographer Arthur Edwards, who's covered the royals for decades, just called Meghan and Harry's wedding the worst royal engagement ever. Yes, the fairy tale moment the world thought was perfect was apparently a total disaster behind the scenes. From icy vibes to shocking behavior, Arthur says what really went down is nothing like the story we were sold. So buckle up, because we're about to break down the royal wedding that wasn't so royal after all. And if you live for drama with a crown on top, hit subscribe. This is Clout Therapy. Arthur Edwards isn't just a photographer. He's practically part of royal history. For more than 40 years, he's been the man with the camera at every single milestone. Think about it. He was there when Diana first stepped onto the scene, when Charles married her in that jaw-dropping wedding watched by millions, and when the cracks in that fairy tale started to show. He was there when William and Kate walked down the aisle, when the future of the monarchy looked secure and hopeful. He's captured christenings, funerals, balcony moments, jubilees, every event that shaped the royals' image in the public eye. He didn't just photograph them, he traveled with them, worked alongside them, and built bonds of trust that very few outsiders ever get. What makes Arthur so different is his reputation. He's not the type to throw dirt for attention. For decades, he's been respected for his professionalism. Always sharp, always discreet, never bitter. The royals themselves know his face, know his presence, and in many ways accepted him as part of their world. When you last this long in an environment as controlled and secretive as the palace, it means you've earned something very rare: trust. And that's exactly why his words matter so much. When gossip reporters talk, you can dismiss it as noise. But when Arthur Edwards speaks, that's coming from the one man who's been inside the palace walls, who's had a front row seat to both the magic and the mess. He's seen the smiles when the cameras are rolling, and he's seen what happens when they switch off. So if someone with his experience, someone who's praised royal weddings before, calls Meghan and Harry's event the worst engagement he's ever covered, you know it's not just drama. It's a serious verdict from the ultimate royal insider. And that's what makes this story hit so much harder. Arthur Edwards doesn't hold back when he talks about Meghan and Harry's wedding. In fact, his exact words were, "I hated the day, miserable, worst royal engagement I ever did." And coming from a man who's photographed every royal milestone for decades, that's a brutal verdict. Because let's be honest, to the public, it looked like a fairy tale. Millions around the world tuned in to see the horse-drawn carriages gliding through Windsor, the gospel choir filling the chapel with soaring music, and celebrities from Oprah to George Clooney sitting shoulder to shoulder with royals. It was glamour, history, and Hollywood all rolled into one, the kind of wedding people dreamed about. But Arthur, he says what he saw from behind the camera told a very different story. He remembers chaos everywhere. Nothing felt smooth, nothing felt welcoming. The press, who'd covered royal weddings for years, were pushed aside, restricted, and treated like outsiders. There was no warmth from the couple, no sense of gratitude for the people who'd spent their careers capturing royal history. Arthur described it as disrespectful, like the rules of tradition had been thrown out the window and replaced with cold indifference. And then there was the heat. If you watched from your couch, you probably didn't realize how brutal it was in Windsor that day. Guests were crammed into St. George's Chapel, dressed in heavy formal clothes, with the sun beating down mercilessly. People were fanning themselves, sweating through their outfits, and Arthur swears some were close to fainting. Instead of joy, the atmosphere felt stifling, literally and emotionally. For him, it wasn't a celebration of love. It was uncomfortable, tense, and deeply unmemorable for all the wrong reasons. So while the world saw sparkling images of a fairy tale, Arthur Edwards walked away with the opposite impression. To him, this wasn't just a disappointing wedding. It was the lowest point of his decades-long career covering the royals. And when a man who's witnessed every royal high says this day was the worst, you know something was seriously off. On TV, Meghan and Harry's wedding looked flawless. Sunlight bouncing off the stone walls of Windsor, guests glowing in designer outfits, everything straight out of a storybook. But Arthur Edwards says the reality on the ground was completely different. Inside the chapel, guests were suffocating. Windsor was scorching hot that day, and everyone was dressed in heavy formal wear. Gowns with layers of fabric, hats that trapped the heat, men in full suits that offered no relief. People were packed so tightly into the pews that even the smallest movement felt impossible, and there was no air circulation to break the stifling atmosphere. Arthur describes watching dignitaries, royals, and celebrities all trying to keep their composure as the hours dragged on. Makeup began to run, collars clung to sweaty necks, and you could see fans quietly fanning themselves, hoping the cameras wouldn't catch their discomfort. He says it wasn't the poised, elegant scene that people imagined. Tempers started to flare as patience wore thin, and even those who were used to long royal ceremonies looked like they were struggling just to get through it. For Arthur, the entire mood shifted. Instead of joy and romance, there was tension and frustration. The guests weren't celebrating. They were enduring. He put it bluntly, it felt like survival, not a wedding. And that's the part viewers at home never saw. While millions watched what looked like a perfect royal spectacle, the people inside were counting the minutes until it ended. Arthur's account strips away the fantasy and shows the raw truth. This dream wedding was, for many in Windsor, an absolute nightmare. The celebrity seating at Meghan and Harry's wedding was unlike anything Arthur Edwards had ever seen. Traditionally, royal weddings follow a strict order. Senior royals and those who have served the crown for decades are given pride of place closest to the couple. It's a sign of respect, a way of honoring loyalty and tradition. But this time, that entire system was thrown out the window. Longtime palace staff, extended royals, even family members who had devoted their lives to duty were pushed to the back. Their seats were so far removed from the center that it was almost insulting. And who filled the prime positions instead? Oprah Winfrey, George, and Amal Clooney. Hollywood stars and glittering names who, in many cases, barely had a connection to Meghan and Harry. Some guests later admitted they weren't even sure why they were invited, let alone seated front and center. For Arthur, who'd watched the monarchy carefully preserve tradition for decades, this was shocking. He called it, in his own words, all showbiz rubbish. In his eyes, Meghan and Harry weren't thinking about the family or the institution they were representing. They were thinking about cameras, about celebrity optics, about staging their wedding like a blockbuster premiere instead of a royal ceremony. The message was clear. This wasn't about duty. This was about Hollywood. And for many observers, including Arthur, that decision signaled a dramatic shift away from what royal weddings had always stood for. And then came Arthur's personal nightmare. Covering royal weddings had always been a highlight of his career, the kind of events that produced iconic photographs seen around the world. But this time, he said it was the worst professional experience he'd ever had. From the start, photographers were deliberately blocked and restricted. The palace controlled angles, access was limited, and Harry himself seemed determined to ruin every opportunity for a clean shot. Arthur explained how Harry avoided eye contact with cameras, ducked at key moments, and made it impossible to capture those money shots that define a royal wedding in the press. For a photographer who had once immortalized Diana and Charles, then William and Kate, This was devastating. He later admitted, "I never got one picture in the paper published from that day. Not a single one." For someone of his reputation, that was more than just frustrating. It was humiliating. He even joked bitterly that he needed GPS to find his seat because they had placed him so far back it was as if he didn't matter. But beneath the humor was real pain. For Arthur, this wasn't just a bad day at work. It felt like a rejection, a public snub from the very couple whose history he was there to capture. After 4 decades of service to the crown, being treated as disposable was a wound he never forgot. The reception was supposed to be the crown jewel of the day, the part everyone looked forward to after hours of pomp and ceremony. Guests arrived expecting the kind of royal feast that had defined past weddings. Long banquet tables, fine wines flowing, endless courses of rich food, and enough champagne to keep the celebration buzzing into the night. But what they got instead left jaws on the floor, and not in a good way. Arthur Edwards recalled how the feast turned out to be nothing more than finger foods. Tiny plates of avocado toast, miniature bites, delicate pastel macarons that looked more suited for a photo shoot than for feeding a room of high-profile guests. No grand spread, no sense of abundance, just little samples that left people whispering. Arthur didn't hold back, calling the portions pathetic. For him, the symbolism was obvious. The reception mirrored the wedding itself. All style, all presentation, but no real substance. It wasn't a celebration of family or tradition. It felt more like a Hollywood launch party, staged for optics, designed to look perfect on camera, but leaving people hungry, dissatisfied, and quietly stunned at how far it strayed from royal grandeur. And hovering over all of this was something Arthur believed was deeply intentional: Harry's war with the press. To Edwards, the entire day felt like punishment. He and the other photographers weren't just restricted, they were actively sabotaged. Positions were terrible, sightlines were blocked, and they were forced to rely on long lenses and awkward angles that produced flat, unusable shots. Harry never once tried to work with them, never gave even the smallest gesture that could create an iconic image. Instead, Arthur felt Harry went out of his way to avoid them, ducking, turning, and shutting down every opportunity. The contrast to William and Kate was glaring. When William married Kate, the couple had gone above and beyond to share their joy with the world. From that balcony kiss to carefully releasing baby pictures that reassured the public they were included in the family's story. Harry, by comparison, treated his wedding as a closed-off event. Arthur believed he wasn't just ignoring the media. He was making a statement, using the biggest day of his life as a weapon against the press he despised. For Arthur, it was devastating. What should have been history in the making felt instead like a vendetta, a personal battle that left the world and the people who had spent their lives covering the royals completely shut out. For Arthur Edwards, Meghan and Harry's wedding was never really about love or unity. It was a statement, a declaration of independence dressed up as a fairy tale. He'd covered enough royal events to know what tradition looked like, and he saw how those traditions were stripped away piece by piece. Instead of honoring the monarchy's long history, rituals were swapped for celebrity stunts that felt straight out of a Hollywood script. Arthur believed that was no accident. It was Meghan and Harry signaling to the world that they weren't bound by the same rules as William and Kate, or even Charles and Diana before them. They were going to do things their way, even if it meant turning their backs on centuries of royal protocol. To him, that wasn't modernization, it was betrayal. And behind palace walls, Arthur was convinced the Queen, Prince Charles, and the senior royals must have been furious. What millions saw as fresh and modern, Arthur read as a deliberate snub, a rejection of the institution that had given the couple their platform in the first place. The aftermath of that day only confirmed his fears. The wedding wasn't the beginning of a new era for the monarchy. It was the start of estrangement. Arthur spoke with sadness about the fallout, especially for Archie and Lilibet. Those children should have grown up surrounded by cousins, doting grandparents, and the stability of a close royal family. Instead, they were cut off, growing up oceans away from the very family ties that had once defined royal life. Arthur said the couple's obsession with privacy became a shield, not to protect their children, but to block out the royal family entirely. They closed the gates on Windsor and Sandringham, yet at the same time sold their version of the story to Netflix, Spotify, and every media outlet willing to listen. For Arthur, that was the most painful part. Watching privacy turn into a weapon, used not to shield innocence, but to drive a wedge between Harry's children and their royal relatives. And then came what Arthur described as Act 2, the Oprah interview. If the wedding was the Declaration of Independence, Oprah was the war cry. To the public, it was billed as a tell-all. But to Arthur, it looked and felt like a carefully staged performance. From the dramatic camera angles to the timing of the revelations, he believed every word was designed to generate scandal, headlines, and outrage. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't healing. It was an attack. He saw it as Meghan and Harry doubling down on the path they chose in Windsor, only this time with a global audience hanging on every accusation. And for Arthur, that confirmed the truth he had sensed all along. This wasn't about escaping the spotlight. It was about controlling it. The wedding was never just a wedding. It was the opening act of a new brand, one that turned its back on family and duty in exchange for fame, attention, and profit. What the world thought was a fairy tale was, in Arthur Edwards' eyes, nothing more than a carefully staged illusion. Behind the carriages, the choirs, and the celebrity sparkle, he saw chaos, disrespect, and a couple more focused on optics than family. His verdict still stands to this day. Meghan and Harry's wedding was the worst royal engagement he ever covered. And if you thought this breakdown was brutal, just wait until you see how Trevor Noah roasted Meghan Markle on live TV. That video is up now, and you do not want to miss it.